What is up, everybody? Alex here, and this is part two of our interview with Dr. Lyneil Mitchell. Enjoy. I think jujitsu is becoming a big hobbyist sport for specifically middle-aged men, and I think a lot of people work a desk job and then they come to class, and there are obviously issues with sitting all day and then going to do something like jujitsu. Do you have any advice or tips about what someone can do at the office to help make sure that when they're on the mats, they're less prone to injuries?
Yeah, this is my favorite. I feel like you read my mind from like 15 years ago. I remember like exactly what you just said. And what happened was went to this jujitsu place and I'm like warming up, like I'm ready for college wrestling practice, right? And my buddy that was there afterwards, he said, "Dude, you're scaring the shit out of everybody." Right. And I was like, What do you mean?" He's like, "You're over there warming up like you're getting ready for the national championship." And I was like, "No, I'm just trying to stop from getting injured." Right. Like that's the whole idea. And so and again, I was already a PT at this time. So, right, guys like sit in their, accounting or finance job, right, at a desk all day in meetings. And they, hop in their car and they drive 30 minutes to get it, to get to jujitsu or, whatever grappling thing is. They get there 3 minutes before, right? They get their gi on, they go, do a couple of knee touches, right? And all right, blood time, let's roll, But a lot of times, you guys will work on some shrimping and some rolling and some, falling type of things in the warm up. But it's nothing again compared to like the sport of wrestling, what we do to warm the body up. And I think that would be probably the biggest thing is just learning. And also, I teach this to my athletes, like your warm up should be something that you're preparing to use in competition. Like if right now you had to compete and it was like, BJ Alex, you're up in 5 minutes. What are you going to do? Are you ready for that? Are you
Yeah,
prepared? Because if you're prepared, right, you're not prepared. So what happens
Alex
is your
Alex
nervous
will be
system,
prepared. Alex
yeah,
is
right.
real.
So your nervous system is going to go into a fight or flight response, right? Because you haven't been practicing that thing. And it's kind of like I've gotten more like this as I've gotten older. I want to wear the same gray shorts and the same black shirt every day because I want my decision making fatigue to be at its least, right? And so I want to have all of those things on autopilot to a certain degree. I know what I'm going to do to warm up. I know how this works. And I'm going to do this as part of my discipline and my conditioning to prepare myself for the next step, right? And that's another thing in training, BJ, right? And in PT, we think about this a lot more too, I think, because we're always trying to get that tissue to heal and also be able to function at the same time. So during a session, what am I going to do from the beginning of the session to the end, and how I'm going to stack my modalities and intervention? Am I going to do balance training in the beginning and fatigue out some of those neural pathways, or am I going to do that at the end where I know that it's really, really going to challenge you because of what we just did? That's always an example I think of, and it's also some of the danger of removing some of the danger or adding some of the complexity just real simply with the balance exercises. But thinking about that syntax and what you're doing to prepare, even again, a warm up is designed to prepare you for the activity that you're doing, right? So you should be sweating and ready to go, not 20 minutes into your training session, go, all right, now I'm warmed up, right? Type of scenario. So maybe even getting there 15 minutes early, right? To do your own thing. Another thing would be is have some assessments done on you in that light, so you know what things that you need to do to work on, because a lot of times you can be really inefficient and overstretch and over warm up and do all this extra stuff because you're not doing something that's specifically designed for you. Right. And so if you have the opportunity to do some type of assessment and really get something designed, in this case, especially for jujitsu and the movements that you're going to have to do based upon your body. So it's almost like you're warming up for the warm up. And so I thought about this a lot too. In individual sports, this is even more important because a lot of the times we get, how do you want to say, dependent upon the coach or whoever's running practice to tell us what to do, and then we don't take charge of that. Right now, you have a guy like BJ that knows this stuff. You're going to do that because it's part of who you are, right? You know the differences of what I'm talking about, but the average jujitsu guy is just coming in to be led, right? And so sometimes we're not always leading people to the strong angle. Maybe it's just because we got an hour and we got to slam this stuff in, right? And my rule number three is you run the extra laps, and sometimes getting a better warm up in is trick. So rule number one is you do the basics, right? The basics before the exotics, always, right? And it's get out of bed, brush your teeth, what all that basic stuff, and again, basic movements, basics, right? Always win. Number two, I'm not going to make it worse, right? So whatever I'm doing, right, whatever's going wrong or whatever's happening, it's not going to be my fault that I made it worse. I'm here to leave this situation better than I found it, right? No, despite whatever's going on, right? Despite the excuses that I can make about how hard it was or the victim that I want to be, right? I'm still not allowed to make the situation worse. And if I can do those two things, it sets me up to be able to run the extra laps. So, and you don't have to run crazy extra laps. You just have to do something consistent that's a little bit extra. And again, even Henry Cejudo was talking about this in a video. With Tom Brands. Actually, it was Tom Brands talking about it, about I'm going to mentally do something, especially when it comes to competition, that I think that some other person is not doing, that differentiates me and makes me better. Right. But it doesn't have to be maximum intensity. It just has to be something.
Yeah. So let me ask a question real quick too. 'Cause I'm wondering, like, first of all, I'm notorious, and Alex can attest to this, for my warm-ups. And then the jujitsu world, like, you see it too. Like, coaches shouldn't be using class time, an hour of time, like that hour block, to do extensive warm-ups. It, in my mind, that's a failure, right? Like, because I need to make sure we're doing at least 10 minutes of warm-ups, and it's a stacked warm up, right? Like, it starts pretty nice and smooth, we're just kind of moving around, and then it becomes more sport specific to what we're doing. So if we're doing, um, if the emphasis is stand up, right, where we're working on like ankle picks, or
Especially stand up.
yeah, like, we need to be warm, and your whole body needs to be warm. Everything needs to be lubed up, right? But it's going
Right.
to start, maybe just start with some little trotting around the mat, and then it turns into some low level skips, and then it turns into, you're stacking these things on top of each other, to where by like that 15th minute, we are now actually pummeling, grip fighting, trying to fight for underhooks, because we've spent time getting prepared for that. And then you start turning the class or the training session into more competitive, with a specific, task in mind, right? With a specific objective. And then at the end of class, we always sit down in a circle and we talk. We kind of process through, what are you going to focus on for the rest of the week and all that stuff. So trying to go through this roller coaster of class, right? And I think people who, and I don't care, like, I don't have a black belt, I'm not a world champion, but I would challenge anybody to say class should not be used, warm up time should not be about 10-minute part of class. I think you're actually doing a disservice to your people. But there are coaches who don't do that, and that's fine. Whatever, that's their bag. That's your thing.
Sure.
But if you were
Yeah.
to say
And
to
again,
somebody, if you were to say to somebody who doesn't have a coach who like emphasizes that, they're like, oh, let's just get in and do some windshield wipers with our legs and do some, shrimps, and that's fine. What would you say to that person? Here's like 5 like good movements to just start to wake your body up if you just got out of your car. If you're, you've been sitting in an office all day, like, if you got 5-10 minutes, these are the things like you should probably focus on. What are some good like exercises?
yeah, I think some simple like up dog, down dog type of movements, and I'd like. It's funny because what I taught the Gannon guys when I was there, a 5 minute warm up that was like this. I'm really into, what are you going to do in 5 minutes? You just got called to do something, and we would actually drill this at practice, right? And so you better have a routine that's that prepares you, right? Type of situation. So something where you're getting on the ground on all fours, either hands and knees, hands and feet, where you're working on stretching in and out of position again, like up dog, down dog, some rotational movements there, some rolling, and probably some type of, running type of movement where either it skips or even some, high to moderate intensity running back and forth just to get your nervous system up to where it needs to be. And a lot of times that's the issue. We can do some, things to get mobilized, right? But then the nervous system's not quite ready where it needs to be, especially, this would also come to competition. And what you actually made me think of is that you have to be in good enough shape to be able to warm up like this, right? So that would be what you're doing outside of, I think a lot of times, jujitsu is the hardest thing that people are doing. And so they're using that as their conditioning and they're not actually doing any type of other conditioning to try to prepare themselves for, the ability to do more at practice. So that's another reason why they want to avoid it. Right. So I don't want to do all that extra because I'm going to get tired. Now BJ is going to choke me out because I had to warm up too much. Well, it was just like, "Well, sorry, you were out of shape." With that, whatever you're doing is also thinking about your breathing. And so basically, you could even do some breathing drills that are, that warm you up. And then you can also do breathing drills that cool you down. But paying attention to your breathing while you're moving through these patterns, because what a lot of people would do is they hold their breath. And so when they're doing their mobility work and they don't realize they're doing that. And so same thing with strength work, they'll do the same thing. So trying to focus on keeping an even calm breathing pattern while you're going through these movements. And I talk about this. It's your internal kinetic chain. If your breathing pattern's not working, nothing is working. Right. And
Like,
so right. Right.
yeah.
And so, but we don't think about that. It's just such a simple thing. Right. So yeah, I mean, you can do your 90-90 hip rotations, oki in, oki out, but you want to look at trying to get touch points on every part of your body rolling on the ground. And the other part would be is probably your neck, right? Doing something for your neck, whether you're just doing some basic movements, you can do some isometrics, you can do some light neck bridging. I know some people don't recommend that, but I think again, if you got too weak of a neck, then you probably shouldn't be a jujitsu anyways. So, you basically, again, through your assessments and whatnot, should be looking at those things. But again, getting the muscles in your neck and your spine activated are probably, huge again for jujitsu, particularly, huge things. Again, you can always try to get super specific on which movements to do, but you want to hit those touch points.
Now I know you have um, experience with like rehabbing knees and stuff, and I saw one of the things you developed was the knee machine with the up squat, and I've also been seeing a lot of talk about doing belt squats over like a traditional barbell squat. Could you kind of talk about how you developed the knee machine and why you think it's important?
Yeah, so the belt squat's an interesting thing, right? Because it's almost more like a rehab tool when you really look at it, and it's a great way to strengthen your legs, especially if you have back problems for a lot of people. But you're also kind of, if you want to, why I called it a rehab tool is because you're looking at segmental strength instead of full body connection. And so when you take the load and move it to the hips off of the shoulder, your upper body now can behave in any way that it wants to, and you're not loading it, obviously, and you're not loading your spine. So you're creating segmented, isolated strength in the lower body while ignoring the upper body. And it would kind of be like the same idea in jujitsu. Like you're just going to do leg locks and you're not going to learn anything about how to do Kimuras or Americanas or anything, right? So you don't want to ignore the rest of the body. And so at the same time, how do we strengthen people that have injuries and knee problems and back problems and things, safely? The belt squat can be a great tool for them. And it's just like anything, the barbell can be a great tool. Let's compare the barbell to the belt squat. Well, what is the probably the main thing? And even, BJ kind of alluded to this. The first time that you use a barbell, the hardest thing the challenge that you have is balancing it. Right. And so even I can still remember with Mr. Savannah, the first time I ever did bench, and I was even pretty strong when I was younger, right? Yeah, right, exactly. And you can't balance it. So the barbell is actually a balancing tool first, and most exercises actually are. If you look at alignment, how are we maintaining alignment and connection? Well, that's basically balance, right? It's proprioceptive kinesthetic awareness. So the barbell is the thing that challenges that. I even think about that, like, why did we make the barbell so long? It's kind of inefficient in a lot of ways. Again, and especially when we know functionally centered loads are the way that we typically live life. When we go to, even when we teach somebody to pick something off of the floor with a back problem, right? And so the up squat has been this fascinating progression, not comparing it to a belt squat. And that, I think that's I think the connection that people want to make, but it's actually connected back to this isokinetic machine that Mike Maddox made back in the 70s, and then the super cap machine that Barney Fuller made, through the early 90s, I believe. And so what they were looking at is, it's fascinating that they were onto this. And the research now shows this. If you want specificity in a pattern, you have to train that pattern. And so, and I was talking to a guy about this yesterday. Back then, we didn't have a lot of literature on, well, what do you do with guys like us that have now been training for 5, 10, 20 years? Right? That wasn't a thing because people hated working out, right? They liked their sport. They liked doing whatever activities it was. And then we were forced to do these other things that ended up eventually becoming a competitive advantage that you had to do, right? It,
Yeah.
it ended up becoming part of the development of you as an athlete in a sport. So a lot of these guys would avoid it, to a certain degree. And then the other part is we didn't do it year round. And so you had these breaks where people could rest, and that changed a lot of the dynamic behind it. But basically, the reason I'm bringing that up is because you have the principle of initial gains that kicks in really quickly in a lot of things. But when we start doing strength training, it's very what I would call philometric, the love of the numbers. And so I worked with an Olympic wrestler, actually, I'm not going to mention his name, that basically took himself out of the competitive wrestling circuit because after he hurt his back, he couldn't deadlift a certain amount of weight. And in his mind, that metric needed to be met for him to actually compete in his sport.
Right.
And right, that metric's actually a proxy. Was having no problems competing in his sport. And the reason why his coaches and people brought him to me was for me to assess him and show him, like, there's nothing wrong with you. And he literally retired because he couldn't deadlift a certain amount of weight, right? And when you see these things firsthand, you go, okay, wait a second, what is going wrong here? Something is not right, right? Well, weightlifting is very gamified. And so again, philometric, love of the numbers, you add 5 pounds, you add 10 pounds, you add 30 pounds, right? And you keep doing that, but it actually doesn't tell you anything about how your kinetic chain is behaving, and also how it's going to behave when you go to transfer it into, your sport,
Mhm.
particularly. So I know this is super long winded. Do you have anything that you want to ask or talk about that? Because I'm getting ready to get this is even a little bit longer of a segment. Any
Well, I
thoughts
think,
on that?
yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, and this is probably kind of where you're going towards, it's like the law of diminishing returns, right? And I
Right.
think there's, and it can be backed with research, like in track and field. Like shot putters need to be a certain level of strong, like absolute strength, and then there's certain, but then to get even more strong doesn't actually help you display power better,
Right.
right? Because there's a trade-off. Because let's say Alex is he's hit his he's in the 99th percentile of Alex. For him to close that one percentile is not going to help him in his game, because he has a weakness in something else that if he cleans that up and brings that up to his 99th percentile,
Right.
he then will be a better athlete, right? I think like I remember sitting in Louis' truck with him, and he said to me, he's like, and this is what I've kind of carried with me my whole coaching life since that moment. Um, he said, if you're really strong and you're slow, get faster. And if you're really slow and I'm sorry, if you're really weak and you're super fast, get stronger. Like, and it's kind of like that simple. And again, people just like overcomplicate it. They think adding it when you're at your peak in strength, to add 5 pounds is a year, two years in some cases of work. For what? You're not a lifter. That's not what you're serving right now. If you want to be a better jujitsu player, like you need to get better at the thing that's going to make you a better jujitsu player. And I know for me, like I'm strong enough. That's not what holds me back in jujitsu. It's not. It's
Right.
it's my
Exactly.
mobility.
That's
So,
one thing, BJ.
so
Exactly.
so and you think about it, we start out as a person that's weak trying to get strong, and then we get strong enough and we still think like a person that's weak. Like that's actually the problem, right? So we're
We're
easily conned, right, into believing that we need to keep getting stronger. And we never, that's actually the same thing happened to me. I got to the point where, I was training a whole year and adding like 10 pounds to my bench or whatever, right? And it's like I'm destroying myself and I'm not really getting stronger. And that was really when I started getting more into what I'm into now. So coming back to the up squat, Alex, so these guys had made these machines, and the point I was trying to get to is that we have a hard time. We know that strengthening patterns is the trick. If we can get the pattern specifically, or what I would call a sequenced expression, if we can do it correctly the way that it's actually being performed, you're going to get a faster transfer into what you're doing. But the problem is the modalities and the interventions that we have typically cause the person to break their pattern, particularly into the weak ankle. So again, the weight system basically is always pulling you into the weakest angle of the range of motion, which basically throws you off balance. So when you go to switch directions, the weight continues to move in the opposite direction that you're trying to switch. And that actually you're overcoming the loss of your own balance. And so that's one of the reasons why when the load gets heavier, you slow down because it's harder to switch directions. Right. And so these machines that were developed in the Marinovich system, they weren't even really developed for the Marinovich system. That's the other unique part of the story. But if you go watch BJ Penn and Troy Polamalu and all these guys were using the machines, Mike Maddox had been an Olympic level decathlete, uh, basically, again, won the Drake relays, in 1968, qualified and ended up getting hurt and went on to work for a company that sold isokinetic exercise equipment. And then he developed his own, again, Barney Fuller, these machines. And so they realized that if you could train the pattern under the demands that you were going to see in your sport, that you would see a huge improvement in your, physiological expression, right? Or, your functional expression. And at the same time, Mike, the guy that invented the machine, he's somebody that I've been working with for a long time. And, the wobbler, all of this stuff that I do, he came to visit me in Pittsburgh and was like, "Hey, I'm the guy that invented this equipment. I'd love to sit down and tell you why I invented it and how it all works." And the truth is, nobody would listen to me at this point. And you're a physical therapist. Maybe you'll listen to me, right? I invented all of this stuff for a specific reason, right? And I was like, "Hey, I'm all ears," right? And he stayed in Pittsburgh for a few days, and we met, for like 8-10 hours a day, kind of the same thing you're talking about, BJ, with getting that firsthand experience with Louis. And so again, all of these machines were designed to try to keep you in the pattern that was integrated for the sport that you were playing, particularly running and jumping. And so what he realized over time was that, and we know this with barbell lifting too, people tend to favor one side versus the other, right? A side dominance. It's one of the reasons why we get non-contact injuries. You got ligament dominance, quad dominance, trunk dominance, and side dominance. Even when we're returning athletes back from injuries, we test symmetry index, looking at the right side versus the left side, for example, as a control to try to determine whether they're ready to get back to sport or not. It's not a pure science, but it's something that we do because we know that people, especially after an injury, which at the other side of it is most people have had an ankle sprain or something at some point, and they're typically neurologically still favoring that side and not realizing it. And when you get these higher level assessments, you figure it out. So these machines were designed to replicate these patterns, but he realized that the body was still leaking underneath, that you could still favor one side versus the other. And so the machine was designed to stabilize your knee, where everybody focuses on the foot. And so the foot can be largely ignored if it's not affecting the positioning of the knee. And that was part of my research at the University of Cincinnati. And so some people can have foot and ankle mechanic issues that they don't contribute to anything up the chain because the chain is still being able to stay organized above. Well, everybody automatically goes into the core and the lumbar spine, but the truth is that your body sits on top of your tibia, right? So your tibia is basically aligning what's going on up at the top. And so the tibia and the femur can still stay in alignment despite the ankles below not doing everything perfectly. And so if you can keep the femur and the tibia in alignment, some of it has to do with the again the neurology of your patellofemoral joint. The patellofemoral joint is almost like the brain in terms of we didn't understand how the patellofemoral joint worked until the late 90s and the early 2000s. They were still saying, is the patella moving by itself or is the whole body moving? And then that's causing the patella to move. And this is literally in my career, right? To think like a body part does its own thing without the rest of the body. We were still isolating things. And that's how the medical community looks at things, right? It was crazy. And I said it in these lectures. That was, again, part of my research that I was doing. So the machine that we developed is designed to keep your knees in alignment. That's why I was calling it the knee machine originally. And so when what happens is when the knees are in alignment, now the hips can be in alignment, the pelvis can be in alignment, the spine can be in alignment, and the scapula can be in alignment. And with that, the cool part about the machine is that we don't leave it up to the individual to try to create that organization. Right. And this is one of the problems we have with training in general. Each athlete is bringing a different developmental past into the situation. And so, no matter what we do, they're going to have a tendency to favor that compensation or whatever it is that they have. So, if we don't provide the constraints and the control to keep their bodies in the corridor that they need to be as we go into sprint repeatability or power endurance, or again, even looking at movement economy, their kinetic chain's going to start to leak, and a lot of times that's really hard to figure out. And so we don't want to be adding to that leaking in the training that we're doing. But most of the time we do, even coming back to so much of our philosophy is built on training in the weak angle and not in the strong angle. So this machine is the strong angle machine. It keeps you in the strong angle, connected in an alignment, and it allows you to sequence and coordinate the right pattern with the correct loads in the correct place. The reason why we haven't brought it out, we just got the new harness finished, and so the new harness I did 370 for a set of 14 the other night. So what you've seen online, I've only been using band resistance and things, but now we got it weight loaded. We couldn't really focus on the weight loading part because the harness wasn't working from what we had before. So now we have this, it's almost like a safety bar squat harness, but it attaches to the machine. So this I'm excited actually. This is going to be coming out, and yeah. So I had one of my ACL kids yesterday. He did 280 for a set of actually 14. I don't know why 14 is the number, but he did 14 reps as well. But what happens is when you keep the body in alignment, you have this natural anti-gravity effect. And so this is the part that we get screwed up on, is that most of the time we're trying to be anti-gravity and we're using extra gravity to create that. And that extra gravity and weight, for example, pulls you more into your weaker angles. It compresses your joints. It creates more shear force. And our argument is that these guys that are more integrated, the better athletes, it's almost like their body is under traction because their muscles are in such equilibrium. They have such good intermuscular coordination that their joints aren't compressing and shearing. So when they go to switch directions, this is, you'll see this, and coming back to what you were talking about the inertia on landing, or even doing exercises, that delay in that amortization phase is because of this fragmentation in their kinetic chain. Well, when you see some of these guys that can really move, it's almost like they float, right? So like they'll do a vertical jump and they're like, and they're still floating. Well, why is that happening? Right. So this is our argument. It's from this integration that's going on with the kinetic chain. Sorry again. I know, like, I wish every answer is a dissertation.
I think like a couple like so I have one follow-up to that, and then I have a question, and then we're gonna start wrapping up. Um first of all, I love it. This is all great. Because I'm writing down so many concepts that I need to just dig deeper in. Um, but one of the things that makes me think about too is just a comment on that. Uh, like is being a person who's a rotational athlete for many, many years as a thrower, and then even going back to being a baseball player before I was a thrower. So I've like been in rotation, right, since I was
Yeah,
like four,
yeah.
right? And then grappling's rotational. Everything, it's all rotational, right? So I find it super fascinating how when people start to treat the weight room like the playing field, and they're like, well, I'm going to do more rotation. I'm going to add load to this. So I'm going to be stronger when I rotate. It's like, look, if you're spending all this time in rotation, that's probably not the best thing to do outside of the mat or off down the ring or whatever. You need to work on being uh, having trunk control, right? And whether that's like isometric control or not, it's not about like being in this. I'm going to keep moving super ballistically or super dynamically in rotation because that's what I do in my sport. Like you need to do the other thing, right? So it's kind of like
Do you
along
have a
those.
do you have a wobbler?
I sure do, sitting right there.
You do, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So now if you think about the wobbler, right, what it makes you realize is where your center of gravity
Oh
is,
my
where your
god, yeah,
axis of rotation is, right? So imagine
yep,
if you would have had that back then, right?
yeah,
So you're constantly rotating with lack of awareness of where your center actually is, right? And we're talking about centripetal force. And
yeah,
so how can you have, the best execution on your centripetal force if you don't know where your center is? So what happens is as you're pursuing mastery and leadership on this journey, there's a lot of inefficiency. Right. And
right,
so then you end up hurting your shoulder and your elbow and all of these things because you're trying to constantly find that center and you're struggling to do that despite
yeah,
going at the speed of sport with a heavy weight and trying to violently project it as far away as you can, right? I'll crush you like a worm. I always think
yep,
about that with the with the throwing.
yep,
And again, that's where this stuff originates from, right? It is warlike type of scenarios. But yeah, so and again, diminishing returns, right? And so basically, you're not really working on real rotation. Again, the strong angle is angular, and another blind spot is we say force. Force is linear, torque is rotational. So we have to start thinking about the differences between those things, right? And
yep,
so and again, it all starts even down to just how your joint rotates. There is a joint centration and axis of rotation at every joint. Now that's why the human body is so amazing, and why it's also we haven't really been able to create robots that are able to move like humans do, where our software is way cooler than what we can even create at this point because we can't keep those joints centered while we're dynamically moving like a human body does, right? And so it's the same thing as you go into rotation. And again, we know that, and we're seeing this a lot because people are promoting rotation like it's the new nervous system training, right?
yeah.
Type
It's
of thing, right?
fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah, and again, coming back to shear force, that's all you're doing is creating excessive shear force, and really your rotation doesn't happen through your spine. Everybody's, and again, we'll see that in golfing. That's why I came back to the wobbler because all athletic movements are 40 to 60% to 60 to 40% weight shifting and rotation. So if your weight shifting is not in the right place, when you go to rotate, you're in a misalignment and your axis of rotation is off. So, like in golfers, we will crank their thoracic spine trying to get them to rotate. So I'm going from right to left, right? So, but what happens is when I go in my golf swing, I weight shift to my right foot and then I weight shift to my left foot. If I try to rotate while I'm on my back foot, I don't have as much range of motion as when I get to my front foot. It's the same thing when you throw a football. It's almost the same exact movement, right? So when I go to throw, I basically throw from my left side. I'm on my left side. I'm not on my right side, right? So
right,
the same thing happens. The same thing with discus. Same thing with shot put, right? So if I stay back too far, it looks and feels like I can't rotate because I'm not in the right alignment, right? I'm not connected to that correct position. Now my center of gravity and my axis of rotation can't be there. So automatically I'm going to create shear force. Now, if I add excessive load, what happens is the inertia of that load wants to drift away from the center, right? So even on like heavy medicine ball throws, right? If I use a medicine ball that's too heavy, I can't keep it in this power alignment, right? To come across, it automatically wants to drift out because the centripetal force. But that's
Oh,
not how
yeah.
we punch. That's not how we kick. That's not how we throw, right? So again, maybe a little bit of that you can do to add some, overload to the scenario, but we definitely got to be careful how we're conditioning it neurologically, because that's the problem. Real conditioning is neurological. So we've learned that conditioning is VO2 max and hypertrophy, basically, right? And we've taken the nervous system out of it, but we need to think about skill acquisition. So that's another thing, and motor skills, particularly if you just want to look at that. But it's really skill acquisition that we're trying to condition. And so we have to understand what also is the antithesis to skill acquisition is conditioning the wrong patterns or the wrong, again, sequenced expressions. So you have to look at that kinetic chain of how those events are working. Are they aligned? Right? Do you have all of the parts that you need, and are you putting them in alignment? Are you connecting them so they can actually coordinate into the execution of the expression that you're trying to have?
Makes
Condition
sense.
that.
Yeah, it's the skill acquisition, right? So that kind of goes into my last question for you. And this is a hard question, because there's so many
Oh,
factors
good.
that could hold. So I'll try to simplify it by saying you're a hobbyist, you're in your 40s or above, you're just getting into jujitsu. You're like a white belt, blue belt. You're just kind of like starting your path, but you know this is something that you want to do, which I think makes up the majority of our sport, or people like that, right? And
Right.
they want to stay healthy. They enjoy it. The community is really important to them, so their longevity is important to them. Okay, they may compete every once in a while, but it's really about them being part of the community. If you only have a couple days a week to focus on like lifting, like you need to lift weights, you need to get stronger, more powerful, all those things, and you want to be healthier. Like it's really about that longevity piece. You're already on the mat a couple days a week. You're pretty fit, but you know you can do better. How would you tell someone, given that they don't have like any crazy orthopedic issues, um, what would you tell
They
someone
probably
that doesn't?
do.
And oh, they definitely do, for sure. They don't think they do because they're like, yeah, I just move it around a little bit and it's fine. Oh, um, what would you say to somebody like how should they spend 2 days a week off the mat to just try to keep them on the mat for a longer period of time? What should a training session look like off the mat?
Okay, yeah. So it's funny because I think about this all the time. Every time I get this question, a friend of mine who's actually from California, that it was a jujitsu practitioner herself. I worked with her, and she would always kind of pose this type of question to me in the middle of like the day when we were working together, and I would be in a rush, and she would say, "What should I do about this? This?" And I'd be like, "Just do this, right? Do these, like I just said, maybe down dog, up dog type of thing, right?" Few weeks later, she'd be like, "Hey, this isn't working." And then finally I would assess her and evaluate her and realize that I gave her the wrong information. Right. And this happened like 3 times. Her name's Katrina. So if she sees this, I told her that I'm going to use her for this story because her and I know we've talked about this. And now she's actually a physical therapist, which is the cool
Okay.
part. So this was one of the things, the violation of my strong angle code, basically, of my own systems, is to not do an assessment and to intervene without the assessment. Like I was literally trained on this idea of criterion based progression and evaluation based protocols, right? So the first thing that I would say is if you're serious about sticking in jujitsu for the long term, like you said, longevity, let's think about number one. Like I have a client that I say this all the time. She's recovering from some bad things, but she's a badass at the end of the day, and she loves to work out hard and pushes herself. And I'm like, listen, you want to be doing this next year. You want to be doing this in 5 years, right? You love doing this stuff. So you're not looking at like, I just only want to do this for the next 6 months, right? And then be done and never be able to do it again, right? Because we can basically, you can't win the national championship or the world championship in jujitsu or any type of thing in one practice. but you can ruin your year. You can ruin your career, right? By not doing the right things. And so the first thing is go see BJ. If this is especially going to your group of people, go get assessed. Go get a program that's designed for you, right? So you have something that's this 2 day a week thing that's specifically designed for you and your goals that you have. I would say that that's the absolute, number one thing, because there's so many factors that are going on, right, that are challenging to dial in to say, well, this is specifically what you should do. But in that case, right, you should probably be getting one day where you're getting some zone 2 cardio, right, just getting out there, right, and getting 30 minutes of something that's pushing your cardio into some type of steady state thing, and then 2 days of strength training on top of your jujitsu. Depending, I'm a real big fan of club bells, particularly for grapplers. I would want to see some mixing in of that, or even maces. So some type of combination of even just basic bodybuilding exercises. Cool. Right. Just do something to get some load to your tendons. If you can understand the strong angle, let's try to apply that the best that you possibly can. We know strength training in general is just going to help prevent some injuries, and then add some functional stuff to it as well, right? And again, this is where it gets tough, because if you can't meet the criteria to do functional movements, we should try to keep it as basic as we possibly can. But yeah, loading some lunges, loading some rotational patterns, and even with that, what I really look at, we were talking about this before we hopped on. Like, if I was going to prescribe a program for you specifically for like mobility, I always tell people, this isn't like I want you to do this exercise because I'm trying to make your hamstring lengthen in some way that you're going to have more flexibility. I want to give you something that you can check in with your hamstring every day to see where it's at, right? And when you don't do those things, you go into the next situation blind. So have some type of movement practice, right? That you have a way to check down on your body. Like that, I have a thing that I do with people, where just understanding postural alignment, where you're supposed to be: head up, shoulders are back, chest is up, your knees should be in line with your second and third toe when you do everything. Is your elbow and your knee in the right alignment when you're trying to do some type of movement? Have that check down system, and then have a 5 or 10 minute routine that you can go through, so you can say, oh yeah, you know what, maybe I do need to stretch my hamstring a little bit more today. Or, you know what? Oh man, yeah, my ankle's feeling really off. But if you haven't checked in with your body, then you have no idea what's going on. And then what you just said, I find to be very fascinating, in the way that we will take care of our cars and our appliances and home goods and things, and we'll check in with them, right? And we do regular maintenance things, and we put gasoline in them, and we think of the right fuels, but yet we don't do this with the body, right? And ultimately, what we like to do with training is make it the most intense, dangerous thing, and we don't do that with anything else, right? We don't increase the risk without increasing the safety. And in training, that's one of the things that we have a really big problem with. And again, that's like coming back to my training and what we do. It's the exact opposite. If the intensity goes up, the risk isn't coming up with it. And that's the real trick. Right. And there's not very many things that are like that, but our system is like that. And that's what it's designed to do. Where again, that 370 pounds that I did the other day, I had really no fear that I was going to have any type of issue, because the machine's designed to be safe. Right. And so you also want to look for things that are like that. What's the best bang for your buck? Right. What's going to give you the most benefit with the least? We have a problem with wanting to always do the most and more and more and more. And again, like we were talking about earlier, the diminishing returns set in so much. And now you're no longer focused on what you actually want to be good at, which is jujitsu. You're focused on now being the best at exercising. Right.
Right.
And I'm not into that. Right. We should use exercising and our wellness and health routines to make us better at something else, not to be the best at doing health and wellness and fitness routines.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So much to think about.
Well, that's the cool part about this stuff, right? It's not really simple, but we can simplify it. And that's why I keep coming back to, if again, like I was joking with somebody about this the other day. It was actually Mark, and I said, Mark, God made the strong angle, not me. right? Like I didn't make this up, right? Like this is a principle that's there, right? Use it for yourself. Ask yourself that question. Are you really in the strong angle or the weak angle? Because if you're not recognizing it, you're probably in the weak angle and your grind is way harder than it needs to be. So if you can start finding the strong angles in the things that you're doing, it automatically optimizes what you're doing. So it gives you the ability to manage the present moment. And to end with this is kind of the funny part about me. I went into reading the Bible in this like academic scenario, and also from my own, everything I've ever read before makes me better. Right. And so the Bible did make me better, but there's no way I can stop sinning. And so it was so frustrating to me because I'm like, I kind of went into it like, if I read this enough, I'm going to be able to stop sinning in the present moment. And that's the one thing that we can't do, but we can definitely stop putting ourselves in the weak angle, if that makes sense. Right. And so if you, again, if I told you, hey, that movement that you did that hurt your knee in the weak angle, if you could have just stopped it from happening, if you were going to recognize it the moments before that it was coming, you would have. Right. You're not going to say, oh, yeah, you know what? Let me blow my knee out. Right. This sounds like a great idea. No. Right. Because, and that's the problem. It might be a year before somebody gets back on the mat doing the thing that they love to do, which I think everybody should have to go through that, because you really, find out who you really are when you're going through, that those injuries are sometimes the most adversity that anybody faces there in their entire lives, right? But again, even with that, be in the strong angle, right? And then now a selfish plug, pick up my book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I got it. I have it right there. I'm looking at it. It's on my. School is out on Wednesday.
Nice. Are you gonna dive in? Nice.
Yeah. Yep. That's my goal. Yep.
The book is yeah, sorry, the book is, so everybody that watches this knows that there's not as much of the physical as the mental. The strong angle way, the book is much more about the strategic and philosophical side of the mindset, side of things, and preparation, right? And what I call getting dialed in. And so the physical books and programs and stuff are going to be coming out more as we move forward.
Okay, well, before we end the episode, last episode, BJ and I constructed the ultimate sparring playlist. So my last question for you, is there any specific song that you think would belong on any essential sparring playlist?
Ooh, that's a good one. Essential.
Yeah.
Must have.
Yeah.
Like you're on an island and this is the
You
only
got to
one
fight a
you get.
gorilla for the last piece of food on this island.
Probably Lunatic Fringe. Lunatic Fringe from Vision Quest has to be.
Okay. BJ, have you heard that song?
You know that movie, Alex?
I don't. No.
He's you know what?
Fire. You gotta go
Alex
watch that movie right now.
Dude, Alex, we're gonna have to have like a I don't know, something, an intervention.
So
Because
Alex, I'll give you this story real quick, right? High school wrestler decides to cut a bunch of weight so he can go down to the next weight class to wrestle the returning champion, who's this badass. They show all these videos of him training. He's carrying like a sequoia tree on his back up and down there. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but up and down the bleachers, right? And they keep seeing each other and getting into this conflict and an encounter. And the one guy's super tough, and Loudon's this guy that wants to be this doctor, and he's real cerebral and whatnot. And so he makes the weight. And at the end, before he's getting ready to go out and wrestle this guy, he's in the wrestling room. The lights are turned on. It's funny. It's making my hair stand up in my arms right now. The lights are turned down. There's a spotlight on him, and this song hits. And he starts his warm up, jumping the rope. Boom, and he goes, and then all of a sudden, basically, the doors open, and he runs out and starts his wrestling match. And this song is like the thing that's playing at the time, and it's like the wrestling movie. So you got to check it out.
Okay.
well, Alex is super familiar with the other song we had, "Take My Breath Away" by Madonna. That's more his
Well, Madonna's the best part of that.
he was like
Yeah.
like a club lounge singer. Like
Yeah.
Alex will watch it now. Now that I said that.
Yeah, that's all I had to say.
Secretly,
Sorry,
I love Madonna. So that's a secret about me. I think it might be from that movie. I think that's the reason why. Yeah, that was actually her like first big hit,
Yeah.
right, type of scenario. That was where she was getting famous. So 1985.
All righty. Well, is there anything you would like to plug?
Oh yeah, just any way that I can help you guys out there, let me know. I'm easy to access, right? My website is thestrongangle.com. There's some free assessments and resources on there. I've been doing all of these things that I've been doing, to try to help people, right? That's what I'm about, is trying to help people. I obviously need to make a living and whatnot, but I'm taking everything from my career, some of thanks BJ for that great introduction that you gave me to. I should have said that earlier. Um, and trying to get the information out, right? Like biology is supposed to do. We're supposed to pass our information off to the rest of the group, and so I think that not operating with some of this information is basically an inefficiency that's really preventable. And so once you understand this stuff, it's really easy to start applying. It just takes a little bit of time to get your head wrapped around it because most people have been taught in the weak angle. And so once you start seeing the strong angle, it starts changing everything about your worldview.
All right, well, this has been another fantastic episode of the Tap Often podcast. My name is Alex. Your name is... Who cares? We'll catch you next time.
It doesn't matter what your name is. That's great.